Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another live iThemes training event. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and today I am joined by Kathy Zant. Kathy's going to be talking to us about how hackers exploit vulnerable websites. Now, Kathy's been working with WordPress for well over a decade in both technical and marketing roles for several brands in the WordPress space. Today, she's the product marketing manager for Cadence WP, but we're also excited to tap into her deep knowledge of WordPress security during today's training. Welcome back to iThemes Training, Kathy. Glad you're here with us.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Nathan. How are you doing?
I am doing okay. A little under the weather today, so I'm having trouble getting ideas in my head connected to words that are coming out of my mouth, but hopefully we'll survive. This is an intriguing topic today, how hackers exploit vulnerable websites.
It sure is. Obviously there's so much creative energy, creative things that you can do with the computer, and hackers are some of the more creative and mischievous people out there. So it's always interesting to look at what they're doing and how they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, give us a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, sure. So we're going to talk about we're going to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and look at what happens in the security world. Because what we're going to talk about today is not necessarily all WordPress security. A lot of these principles apply to internet security and technology security across the board, not just for WordPress, but we're going to lean on that security knowledge and apply it to WordPress. So we're going to look at hackers and why they're attacking WordPress, some of the most common attacks, and how vulnerability research and how hackers actually find these types of vulnerabilities, how vulnerabilities are scored, and how this is communicated to users and systems people around the world so that they can protect their systems and really kind of bring it home so that we can help everyone who's listening keep their WordPress sites safe.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot to do today, and actually you're going to give us a live sample of a hack. Is that right?
I am. It's going to be a very simple one, but if you've been in WordPress for more than a few years, you might remember this one, and we'll see exactly how easy it was to exploit this vulnerability, something that, you could probably do if you've got a couple of sites. Wouldn't recommend, but you can play with it and see how easy it is to exploit this particular vulnerability. We'll also look at how easy it is for some of these malicious attackers to brute force sites, and how important it is to protect your site from brute force activity.
Absolutely. So we have a long way to go today and a lot of fun things to see. We're getting some questions in GoToWebinar about being able to see the screen. And likely, if you're not able to see the screen, it's likely it's hidden behind some windows on your computer somewhere. Look for an icon that's like an orange, like a flower-shaped icon in your icon tray, and click that, and it will likely bring the shared screen to the foreground. It's likely just hidden. If you are in GoToWebinar and you've not yet made your way over to our chat room, we invite you to do so at ithemes.com/chat. Just pop open a browser window and head there to ithemes.com/chat. Therein, you will find several links that are important. One is the link to today's slide, so you can see everything that Kathy has on her screen and these slides that are currently being shown. Also, there's a live transcript link if you'd like to follow along with live transcripting, if that makes it easier for you to understand. We have that link for you available in the chat room at ithemes.com/chat. Also, there's a link to the replay, which will be available about an hour after we wrap up today. So head over to ithemes.com/chat. We're not going to be able to watch the questions or chat area of GoToWebinar from this point forward. We do invite questions in the chat room throughout today's webinar. I do ask two things. If you ask a question, please put the word question and I'll uppercase at the beginning. That just makes sure to capture my attention that you have a question there. And second of all, if you do ask a question, please watch the chat room for the next couple of minutes in case I have a follow-up question, just so we get a good understanding of what you are actually asking for our time of Q&A with Kathy at the end. So with that, Kathy, let's get started. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Yeah, let's get started. Thanks a lot, Nathan. You gave a great overview of how everything works around here. So there are links in the chat for the slides. If you're having a hard time seeing the screen, you can always follow along with those slides. I'll try to make things as easy as possible. There's also a lot of links in the speaker notes so that you can grab those as well and play along, because hacking really is about play. So let's get started, because you're going to get a little bit of some hacker mindset as well here. So what we're really covering is who are these hackers and why security is so important. Obviously this discussion wouldn't occur if security wasn't important. So we're going to give you some stats that really underscores that. And then we're going to review some of the most common attacks and really talk about vulnerability research, how it happens, how vulnerabilities are scored, and of course, how to protect yourself. So why is security important? Well, there's a lot at risk. The more valuable your WordPress site is, the more you need to protect it. If you live in a giant castle of a house, you're obviously more of a target for thieves, right? And the more valuable your site is, the more you have to risk if something bad happens. According to the National Cybersecurity Alliance, 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a data breach. And it's unfortunate, but I've seen this happen to medium-sized companies, public companies. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily destroy a company like Target, who in 2013 had a giant breach that compromised 800 point-of-sale machines across the United States. They're still in business. They were still able to recover. But smaller businesses, you might not have cybersecurity insurance. You might not have all of the tools necessary for incident response to make sure you're back in business and protected going forward. Smaller businesses have more at risk, especially if you're in growth mode. As you're growing, you want to make sure that one of your primary assets, your website, is protected. And AT&T did some research, obviously trying to sell security, and they found that companies with proactive security policies had higher sales growth with higher profit margins. There's something about a security mindset that makes people just more successful in business. They also found that companies without active security policies did not have very strong sales growth and lower profit margins. So thinking about security is incredibly important to your business. That's why we're here. We're going to keep your sites safe by understanding how hackers think, understanding what they're up to, and kind of diving into what they do and learn from our friends in the security community. First, who are hackers? If there's any type of discussion in the media about what hackers are up to, you usually see this Guy Fawkes mask and the mischievousness and the malintent of hackers is always at the forefront. But nobody really knows who these hackers actually are. And if you start looking at some, stock photography for hackers or security events, you get, this guy. I don't know if he's a hacker. He could be, or he could just be like cold in his basement there trying to write code. Who knows? But we see pictures like this nonconformist teenage hacker girl. There's this whole mindset in the media of who a hacker really is. And, I've been dealing with security even before WordPress. One of the first servers that I inherited at a company, and I was just, the internet developer was my title. And the server that I inherited from someone else was not locked down. And a white hat hacker came and put a file on the root of that website saying that I had been hacked. So I got a very early introduction into security, even before WordPress, had to go take security classes and all of this stuff, because I made that assumption that someone knew more than I did and that someone had secured that server, and they didn't. But hacking was around even before then. Here's something that's surprising. These guys probably look a little familiar to you. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, way back in the day, actual hackers. These guys got together in the hacking community and were doing things with phone phreaking. Basically, they were getting free long distance phone calls by playing specific tones into analog phone systems and getting free long distance. Actual hackers are extremely creative people. It is a really fun community, and it's also very playful. Steve Wozniak, actually, I saw an interview with him, and he was talking about how he really liked having a phone that had repeating, or a phone number with repeating numbers, because kids would call that number more often. They'd pick up, mom and dad's phone and call that number, and he liked talking to kids. They're very playful people, and they're very creative. The world has been changed, and the world we live in was created by hackers. And just to underscore that idea that hackers are children, this is one of the tools that hackers would use for phone phreaking. An actual Captain Crunch whistle that they found at the bottom of a cereal box played the exact tone that they could use in order to get into the phone system. So hackers are extremely creative people. They have that childlike mindset, that curiosity of, I wonder if I can do this. I wonder if this will work. And they play and they find things. So the hacking community is something that we not only should have some reverence for, but we can learn from in the things that we do. But they're not all, the good guys. In the hacking community, this is the SEO community as well. You talk about black hat SEO, black hat hacking. The difference between black hat and white hat hacking is basically intent. The black hat hackers are not following specific rules. White hat hackers have some parameters. So there is a type of hacking called penetration testing. And if somebody asked me to do penetration testing for, say, their WordPress website, I would ask them, what's in scope? What can I test? What can I hack? Can I get into your email? Is that in scope? What about your FTP login? What about your cPanel? And we would come to some parameters in that assignment to say, okay, you can go after everything, but you stay away from email, you stay away from our accounting systems, but anything having to do with cPanel, the website, any logins there, you can try to get into those. So that's what a white hat hacker would do. They have specific rules that they have to follow when they are addressing a system, whereas a black hat hacker, anything is in play. And these are the guys that give us the most trouble. But the great thing is that the white hat hackers, they have blue teams and red teams, and there's offensive security and there is defensive security. And those security teams are the ones that are helping us discover where the vulnerabilities are before the bad guys do, so that we can stay safe. So in the white hat world, there is something known as responsible disclosure. So these hackers find vulnerabilities and they make sure that your site is protected. They make sure that vulnerabilities are patched and that the security community as a whole understands what is happening with the vulnerability, so that people who are coding can learn from these types of vulnerabilities and ensure that everyone can stay safe. So because this is so important, not just to all of security, but to WordPress as well, I wanted to walk through how responsible disclosure works. How does iTheme Security alert you when there's a new version of a plugin that needs to get patched right away because there's a vulnerability? So, when site scan happens and that there's a vulnerability, how did that vulnerability get discovered? And what does that exactly mean? So we're going to talk a little bit about responsible disclosure and some security vulnerability scoring, first of all. So security researchers certification is very important in the security field. And they have to do security research to keep their certifications. So they are constantly looking for vulnerabilities so that they can publish about these vulnerabilities in order to keep their certifications up. It's also a lot of fun to them. I saw a survey recently where they asked hackers why they did what they do, whether it's black hat or white hat. And most of them, the majority of them, said it was fun. They liked the challenge. They liked the intellectual challenge of discovering vulnerabilities. So It's great when we can support these type of people and allow them to wear the white hat instead of the black hat, or even the gray hat where, you know, the lines are even more fuzzy and blurred. So they find some code. Let's say somebody working in the WordPress security space, they do a search for a plugin. Let's say they want to go after a plugin that has a very large install base, for example, if they want to get a lot of attention from it. So they look for vulnerabilities in that code. They may start looking for things that have been hacked in the past, or mistakes that they know many plugin developers might make. For example, one of them is a function in WordPress called isAdmin. And isAdmin is a test to see if a page is being shown on a WP admin page. And a lot of, well, not a lot, but in the past, a lot of plugin authors have used that to test whether or not somebody is an administrator instead of using a function that is current user can. So using isAdmin has caused a lot of problems. So they'll look for plugins that are using isAdmin, for example, to see if it's being used inappropriately. They'll test that and see whether or not they can actually exploit anything because it's being used inappropriately. They'll develop something that's called a proof of concept. And this is either a document that explains what that vulnerability is all about, what is being done inappropriately, and how it can be exploited. So that proof of concept is really important in communicating to the developer what's going on. Now, if you have developed a plugin at all and you've ever received a security report, you may have gotten something that said something like, I can hack your plugin. And no details whatsoever. There is nothing more damaging to the mindset of a developer is to receive one of these where they're like frantically trying to figure out what's going on. The proof of concept outlines it all, and it's very clear and tells the developer what needs to happen, how it can be exploited, so that that developer can very, very quickly test that proof of concept and write more secure code, write a patch to help ensure that that plugin is not exploitable. So basically they'll send that to they'll basically find the developer, make sure that they have a secure channel, that it's the right person that they're going to be talking to. You don't want to just send a security report to anyone and have it, you know, somehow get out into the wild. And then that developer will fix it, acknowledge it, that, you know, there's an issue here, fix it, and then they'll send it to the researcher saying, you know, is there anything else? Do you see any other issues here? Does this fix the problem? And the researcher will run a test and make sure that that's okay, or provide further information. There may be some back and forth between the security researcher and that developer. Then they release that patched software. They might make notes in the plugin's changelog detailing, you know, that something had been patched. Usually at this point, depending on the severity of the problem, it's very vague. You might not know exactly what's going on for some time, because they want to make sure that the patched code is released to the community, that everybody knows that they need to update, and then an update happens. And before any public information is released, the majority of people using that particular code base have their sites updated. Then the researcher is going to release that proof of concept as a published vulnerability disclosure, and they'll walk through what they found and how it was patched, all of that information, any other information that any users of that plugin might need to know. They're doing that not to be harmful. They're doing that for a very good reason. First of all, they want their certifications and they want credit for finding that vulnerability, but they also want to educate other people who may be using insecure coding practices. So it is a good thing when a security researcher releases a proof of concept, because it helps everyone. I remember a specific case with a researcher that I was working with who found a vulnerability in some code, and other developers who had used similar functions wrote and said, hey, you know, I was using that too. Thanks for publishing that, because I had to change how I was doing things. So it has sort of a rising tide lifts all boats type of situation, where you are making the entire WordPress community safer by releasing details of these types of things. Then once that's released, a researcher will reach out to a certificate or a vulnerability numbering authority to ensure that a CVE is assigned. And a CVE is just a unique identifier. It's basically a number that basically tells you what vulnerability has been patched. This is important for people who are managing a lot of different sites, a lot of different servers, a lot of different software, so that they know, this patched that. They're managing a lot of different things. So having a unique identifier that identifies that specific vulnerability is important. And that goes into a database that is then used by a number of different scanning tools, including iTheme Security, which is going to alert you to the fact that you have a vulnerability on your site and you need to update or patch that automatically for you. So all of that's really important. But if you can see, there's a lot of work that goes into ensuring that sites are safe behind all of that. So once your site is patched, a lot has already happened. So it's really good to understand that security researchers are working for the good of the community, the good of everybody using this software. It's not like a harmful thing when somebody's publishing vulnerabilities, because responsible disclosure means that they're disclosing this in a responsible way that's going to help everybody. On the other side of things, there is something called a O-day or a 0-day. Now, this is a vulnerability that's discovered and somehow disclosed, but disclosed is kind of a fuzzy thing, but it's not patched. So this happens when you know there's a vulnerability and the developer has not yet patched it. A 0-day exploit is an attack that attacks those vulnerabilities. In the greater security world beyond WordPress, there are conferences such as DEF CON, which happens in Las Vegas every single year, and everybody in the security world goes to this conference. And I have heard stories of 0 days being sold. Like somebody finds a vulnerability in Microsoft Windows, and there's somebody who wants that vulnerability for some reason. There is a really cool movie if you like espionage, if you like politics, if you like security and technology and all of this creative stuff. It's called 0 Days. It's a movie about the Stuxnet malware that took down some Iranian nuclear plants. And the whole story is just, it's really neat. Anyway, there's a link in the show or in the speaker notes that you can click on for the IMDb for that. If security is at all interesting to you, this is a really cool movie. And it talks about, the greater security world and 0 days and what that means. And there have been plenty of 0 days in the WordPress space, and we'll talk about one of them in just a short moment. But are all vulnerabilities the same? Obviously, they're not. And this is something, if we look at WordPress core, and there have been security patches released, even with the most recent 5.9 version, you've seen some point releases happen and security vulnerabilities have been patched. But I can tell you, looking at some of these, to exploit them would be really, really hard. WordPress keeps getting more and more secure. And the way we know this is by this scoring system known as a CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. And I'm not going to go too deep into this, but all you need to know is if it's a 10, oh my gosh, patch your site right away. And if it's like a 1 or a 3 or something like that, it means you need to be an admin with certain rights, and you also need to be able to FTP into, that kind of thing. You need to have a lot of access and, complexity to get into a site when there is a low score for a vulnerability. So they're going to look at how exploitable it is, the scope of that. Is it just like a settings change where, all of a sudden now a site's in dark mode? Oh my gosh, that's, not necessarily a big problem. And then the impact, is it affecting the confidentiality of information, the integrity of the entire system, or the availability of that system? So all of this is stuff, again, that's applicable to the entire computer security world. It's not just WordPress, but WordPress leans upon all of this because it's incredibly useful. And it helps security researchers communicate to you whether or not you need to drop everything and take action, or if this is something that can be updated, in the course of regular updates that you're doing for your site. So all very important to know. Why do malicious hackers target WordPress? Well, malicious hackers are after, well, they're after a number of things, but primarily they're after a profit motive, either SEO spam, malicious redirects, getting into a site to take it over for phishing or spam mailers. And WordPress powers 40% of the internet. So if you're going to learn a way to hack something, you want something that's going to have a bit of an impact rather than, you know, some obscure thing. Sorry, Joomla. And they expect smaller sites to have no security. You know, WordPress is being used by big organizations and smaller organizations, and it's easier for malicious hackers to hack into 100 small sites, you know, just because they can code a way of doing that, which we'll see in a minute. Or, you know, rather than trying to hack into like the New York Times or some major organization that's using WordPress. And again, we haven't seen a major exploit on WordPress. You know, my recollection was 2017. I lived through this. I have the battle scars, the REST API vulnerability in WordPress 4.7 and 4.7.1. And the REST API had just been introduced, and it was so easy to deface a site. All they had to do is basically call one JSON. It was like a long string with a JSON variable there, and you could basically deface a site. The impact wasn't that great. There weren't like site takeovers, but you could wipe out site content and replace it with something that you would like to have on that site. So it was really fun for the kids who were hacking, but it wasn't so fun for site owners. But that has been, you know, that's what, almost 5 years ago that happened. There have not been any major vulnerabilities in WordPress. Plugins, you know, there's 60,000 of them in the repo, plus all the ones you can get on places like Code Canyon and elsewhere. And that's where, you know, we see the most common intrusion vectors when we're talking about vulnerabilities. So, you know, what do you do to stay safe there? You just, you know, obviously use some good thinking when you're choosing a plugin for your site, and keep your plugins up to date. Don't leave plugins on your site if you're not using them actively, and just, you know, have really good plugin hygiene, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to be okay. Open source is more secure. You know, what is it? Sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. Having all eyes of security researchers on open source WordPress code is good for WordPress. It's really hard for security researchers to figure out vulnerabilities in Squarespace, Wix, Shopify. All of these closed systems do not have the benefit of an active security community looking to basically keep their certifications updated, and just the ease of looking at all of the code. The WP directory is a really fun way to look at like what plugin is using admin, what plugin is using Ajax and not securing that properly. There's a database of vulnerabilities at wpscan.com, and this is the same database of vulnerabilities that iTheme Security uses when it's alerting you that there's a problem on your site. It's a very actively maintained database of vulnerabilities, very, very valuable, and also a lot of fun to poke around on. And I'll show you an example of that shortly. So let's look at some intrusion vectors. And intrusion vectors is basically security talk for how did the hacker get in? And so there's 4 of them I wanted to just highlight. First is brute force. Because 9 times out of 10, we're seeing brute force attacks. It's extremely simple to do. I'll show you how. And it's not just brute force attacks on the WP admin. Brute forcing can happen on your FTP. It can happen on your scene panel. Cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, Sql injections, and believe it or not, people infect their own site with malware. And I'll show you what that's all about too. So let's get into the fun stuff. So this is a screen grab from a site running iTheme Security. It's a very small site, but even still, nobody's going to the site. It's a little defunct. It's my mom's site. She's not doing a lot with it these days. She's retired, but her site's still up for a couple of reasons. And she is still getting brute force attacks on her small, insignificant site. Where are these people coming from? Well, there are some links in the speaker notes that you can look at. First of all, there is, and hopefully these will show in the presentation as well. I'm going to click on these. This is it staying? Okay, I think it's showing. This is a common password list. So this one is the rocku.txt. This is a list of basically 140 megabytes of passwords. And you can just page through all of those and see all of the different passwords that have been collected over, I don't know how long, from hacked sites, from hacked computers. They just kind of collect these passwords and they will reuse them. Another thing I can show you, this is a Linux distribution called Kali. And Kali is a penetration testing distribution. It is basically a flavor of Linux for penetration testers and people who are security researchers. And this is what they use to do some of their hacking, including brute forcing. And here's some more fun. Here's GitHub. Just a quick little search of WordPress brute force. And you can see all of the different code bases here that can be used for, there's 150 repository results for that hackers can use to do brute force attacks. Now, how do these work? I'm not going to show you exactly how it works, but I'm going to talk through basically one of the brute forcers. So this is just a screen grab. I don't have Linux on this machine. Well, I do, but it's too hard for the time we have today to get into all of this. So basically, here's a screen capture. This is the brute forcer that was installed on a Linux box. And basically what they do is they have a Perl script that takes a list. So you see list.txt, that's the list of websites that it's targeting. So they can make a list, just a text file of WordPress domains that they know, and they can buy those from other people if they'd like to on the dark web, and that list of passwords. And they put those things into a command line right here, and boom. The brute forcer is going to basically target all of those particular WordPress sites with all of those passwords, and it is going to try to get in. That is why it's so important to protect your site from brute force attack, because it is super, super easy for these kids to get a list of passwords and a list of WordPress sites and see if they can get in. So how do you protect yourself from something like that when, you know, it's kids with their Captain Crunch whistle, basically having some fun to see if they can get in? Obviously, unique passwords everywhere for everyone on your site. That's first of all most important, to not reuse passwords, because you don't know what passwords in a data dump. You can look it up, obviously, on Have I Been Pwned, which I can show you in a minute also. Two-factor authentication. Adding that additional factor of authentication just adds an extra layer of login security. And if you look at those GitHub repositories, most of what you're seeing here is things like XML Rpc logins. So if your site is not using XML Rpc, if you're not using Jetpack, and I think there might be some WooCommerce functionality that uses XML Rpc. If your site's not using it, definitely turn off XML Rpc. That's something that you can do in iTheme security. Adding reCAPTCHA, because this is bot traffic, and reCAPTCHA is going to look at anything coming out of these particular GitHub code bases. They're going to see that as a pattern of attack, and reCAPTCHA is going to work. Another thing you can do is use iTheme security to change the admin username and automatically ban admin user. So if anybody does try to log in as an admin, they're just completely locked out. You can find that under Configure Lockouts menu. All right, let's hack. I don't know if you guys remember this one. This happened a few years ago. And there are some details in the speaker notes that you can click on, and you can look at this more in depth. This is a plugin called Social Warfare. And it was used. I don't think it has grown much in the past few years since this attack happened. It's about 50,000 active sites, but it was a 0-day, and it got out. A malicious actor discovered the vulnerability, and it was shared, and hackers got incredibly busy attacking sites. And I wanted to show you specifically how this works. So we're going to try to do this as quickly as possible so we can get on with other things. So I went to the WordPress repository, and if you go to an advanced view for any plugin whatsoever and page down, you can get to the specific versions down here under advanced options. And the vulnerable version was 3.5.2. So you can select that and download it if you wanted to take a look at it. Of course, there's a warning not to use this on a production site. We're going to be using this for testing only. So we're going to add it to our little test site here. Just basically going to upload the vulnerable version of that particular social warfare plugin. We're going to install that, and we are going to activate it. So my little test site here, and you can see version 3.5.2, and I don't have anybody telling me that there's anything wrong here other than the fact that there's an update, so I'll keep using it. All right, so this is how easy this vulnerability works. On a different site that I have control over, I have a text file, and all it says is this. If you can see that, it just says pre-systemcat etc password, and that's basically going to use a Linux command to show something that nobody should be able to find. I should not be able to run this command on anybody else's site. This is a site I control, the Wolf Diet, long story. This is a site I control. I put this payload.txt file here. Now I'm going to go to this site, and I am going to take a URL, and this might be small on the screen. I'm going to show you real quick what this looks like. If you can see that, I just pasted that in. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to take it, that site, it's going to make a request to this particular test site that has the vulnerable plugin on it. And it's just going to do admin post ? And it's going to do SWP debug, load options, and the URL. And that URL is the one that I control, or a hacker controls. And we're going to show what that does with this plugin. So it is basically showing what it should never be able to show. And I am going to also show you where I got this, because I got this particular exploit of this very old plugin from the WP Scan vulnerability database. And they just basically showed the proof of concept. That's all it is. So you just create your payload file, load it on a location that is accessible. And again, I just took what they had here, which is something that no other site should be able to. I mean, this is a Linux command that you would run on a terminal. And then you visit that vulnerable site, and you just put the URL of the attacker host, which is the site that I controlled that isn't the website. And I was able to run a Linux command, and it's going to show you the content of that on a web server. Now let's think about this. How could I'm not going to tell you how to go hack all these, anybody who's running this. I'm just so sorry for you. I don't think anybody in their right mind would be running this vulnerable plugin right now. But anything that you can run on the command line in a terminal can be done from a web browser. This was bad. And there are other things, Packet Storm Security and Exploit DB. Links are in the speaker notes that you can click on, and you can look at what some other things that people can do. I'm not going to go into all of the big scary stuff, but there is your live demo of what a hack actually can look like. Let's move on to the next one. So that one was cross-site scripting and unauthenticated remote code execution. So that is how they would typify that. And I'm pretty sure that one got a 10. I should have looked up exactly what the CVSS score was but that was bad. And a lot of malicious attackers were using it because it was so easy to just basically take over an entire site. But let's talk about Sql injection. So Sql is the language that talks to databases. And WordPress obviously has a database and it has some PHP code. And Sql is the language that PHP uses in order to talk to the database. And you can string together SQL statements. So a SQL statement will look like this, and insert data into table, and you can string them together with a semicolon. So imagine what happens when you have a form input and somebody puts a semicolon, and then, you know, they enter in, like, you know, it's a first name field and they enter in first name, but then they put a semicolon and then delete star where ID is equal to 1, or delete star from, you know, the users table and wipes out all of the users. That's what a SQL injection would look like. Or they can insert data into a table and you know, update all of the tables in your entire database with a malicious redirect, for example. And then so every post and every page is maliciously redirecting to a bad part of the internet. So this can happen. This happened with advanced Contact Form 7 plugin. There's some links in the notes if you wanted to look at what happened there. But basically, if you see in the middle of the screen this $FID, this was not sanitized. So you want to basically strip out any kind of SQL notifications, any kind of semicolons and other things that basically the database would interpret, the database engine would interpret as executing a SQL statement. So that wasn't done here in this particular plugin. So this can happen, but it doesn't happen very often because there are so many different ways of sanitizing input on WordPress. So SQL input or SQL injection is not as exploited these days. But I wanted to talk about a way that people infect themselves by installing nulled pirated plugins. If you do a search for, let's say, iTheme Security Pro free, you might find a site that has taken the free version of iTheme Security and maybe they changed it a little bit and they put it up on their site as a free version of the Pro that's been nulled. Like everything that's premium about the Pro version has been nulled out, and you can get it for free. And a lot of people will find sites like this that are distributing plugins that look like they are, like you're getting the deal of a lifetime, but you're getting something more than a deal of a lifetime. You are getting malware. And WPVCD malware was very common for a while. It contains spam links. So you install this plugin on your site thinking that you're getting something free, but what you get is spam links, malicious pop-ups, fake administrative users, backdoors. But you would be surprised how many people still do this. So make sure you get your plugins from a known source, from a trusted source, and don't infect your own site. So how do you stay safe? iTheme Security is, of course, the best solution out there for helping you to make good decisions about your site security. The site scan is wonderful for protecting your site against vulnerable plugins and themes, as well as core versions if there ever is a big, scary core vulnerability in the future. It integrates with WP Scan, which I showed you just a moment ago. Definitely a fun database to look at. Paired with version management, SiteScan patches those vulnerable plugins automatically if there's a fix. And there are a number of plugins that never receive a fix. That vulnerability is discovered, and it might be a very bad one. And that researcher reaches out to the developer, and the developer doesn't want to fix it for whatever reason. And you'll usually see a notification in the WordPress repository that the plugin has been closed for security reasons, because that security researcher, if they don't get anywhere with that developer, will usually escalate things with the plugins team, and the plugins team will ensure that people are notified and that no further people can infect their sites with a vulnerable version. But again, iTheme Security, the site scan is a great tool. It also integrates with Google Google Safe Browsing, which is one of the best ways to know if you've been hacked, because Google will detect an indication of compromise and let you know right away if you have an issue with your site. Also, make sure that you're turning off XML Rpc if you're not using it. Use all the password reuse protections you can find. Keep everything updated. If you get a notification that there is an update for a plugin, check those change logs and see if there's an issue. And make sure you subscribe to the iThemes weekly WordPress vulnerability reports, because that will definitely help you stay on top of all of the security issues that are out there. So there is nothing to fear. Hackers are our friends, at least most of them. The good hats, the white hats, the good ones are. So this is not something to fear. A lot of these hacks that happen aren't really complex things that are coming out of nowhere. These are relatively simple things that catch fire for a short period of time, and just ensuring that your site stays updated and that you are paying attention to site security means that you're going to stay safe. You only really need to stay a step ahead of the hackers and make sure that you have a layered approach to security, that you are protecting not just the WP admin, you're protecting the FTP, you're protecting cPanel, your hosting account, your email, of course, and just make sure that all intrusion points are protected, and you're gonna be just fine. So don't fear the hacker. And also, until April 8th, which is just a couple of days, you can get 35% off all iThemes Security Pro and bundles. So definitely take advantage of that, so you can have the tools, all of the tools you need in order to keep your site safe. Hey, Nathan, we got any questions?
Oh, we've got plenty of questions stacked up here, and that is a great deal. If you haven't seen it, over there to the right of the chat room, big banner there, all about the sale for iThemes Security, 35% off everything through the end of this week. Use code SiteScan for a license if you don't have a pro license yet. A bunch of questions stacked up here for you. JJ has a question in first. What would you say, Kathy, the average length of time is between the discovery of a vulnerability and iThemes Security doing something about it?
Discovery of a vulnerability or disclosure. So discovery depends on that back and forth between the security researcher and the developer. So the researcher might discover it and have 14 days of back and forth, or maybe just 3 days, or maybe it's 30 days. The actual disclosure and publication of a vulnerability and the WP scan database, which is curated by a team of professionals that work for Automatic, that there is some time. But I would say average is probably going to be less than 30 days, or let's say about 30 days.
Very interesting. Let's see. Sue has a question here asking, how long does WordPress.org give plugin developers to fix vulnerabilities?
Oh, geez. Well, I can't speak for the plugins team, but from the things that I've seen, they are extremely responsive. When a security researcher reaches out to them, or something funky happens on your site and you reach out to the plugins team and say, hey, this happened and I think it might be this, they are extraordinarily responsive. So they will reach out to that developer right away. If they don't get a response right away, you might see a plugin get closed. They are extremely responsive, and they take the security of the users of WordPress plugins very, very seriously. So it's going to happen really fast.
All right. Let's see. Vern's question is, do developers sometimes ask for those compromised plugin versions to be removed from WordPress? Like, it's a little odd to me that old vulnerable version is still sitting out there and downloadable.
Yeah, well, it's not going, when you click the download button in your WP admin, it's not going to pull that. I mean, that's there for security, for research purposes, because Sunlight fixes all things, and this is open source. We want that to be available, so security researchers and anybody who's coding, like if somebody came along and wanted to learn from what happened with social warfare a few years ago, they might want to go look at that just like we did today and see exactly what could be done there. How important is it to protect that? How exactly did that vulnerability get written into that code base? So the fact that it's there is a good thing. And you saw how far I had to go in order to find it. I had to like really dive deep into it. It's not readily available to novice or average users.
Very good. Let's see. JJ has a question asking, how do I find out if I am using XML RPC?
If you haven't done anything to turn it off, you probably have it available. Use iTheme Security Pro, and there is I did it yesterday. I can't remember exactly how to do it, but you can turn it off. And I've only seen it really used by Jetpack. If you're using Jetpack to authenticate your your WordPress.com account to Jetpack, that's where I know it's used. And there might be something with WooCommerce, I believe. But turn it off and see if anything breaks. Do it on a test site. But I haven't seen a lot of sites who are using it. So most of the time, you're okay to turn it off.
Yeah, there are very few things other than Jetpack that actually use XML RPC anymore. The WordPress app, if you happen to use the WordPress app, does use XML RPC, but that's really it. And to find it, the easiest thing to do is just to use this is true for any iTheme security feature. Just use the search box. When you go into security settings at the top and type XML, and it'll pop up right there. It's under WordPress tweaks underneath advanced, but I always just use the search. Because it gives you live, immediately updating search results right there.
Perfect.
Let's see. Stacy has a question asking, where in iTheme security is the reused password protection setting? And Stacy, that's going to be found under the user groups. In the password requirements, under each user group, there are options to enforce strong passwords, refused compromised passwords, and also set the age where a password might expire. Let's see. And Sue is asking in the follow-up about the XML RPC. Do we usually turn it off? Kathy, do you usually turn it off?
On sites that I really, really want to protect, I'm not like rigorous about it because I use strong passwords and two-factor authentication. But on sites where, like commerce sites where I'm concerned about things, or I'm consulting with someone who's very concerned about their security, I'll make sure it's off.
Yeah. So for us, Sue, I turn it off by default. That's just in our core settings to have XML RPC, and for that matter, the REST API is turned off because we don't have any. The vast majority of our sites don't use REST API.
Yep. I mean, you might as well close the door. If you're not using it, it's just better to just close the door.
Absolutely.
Again, layered approach to security. One thing I wanted to mention about the core team, when there's a plugin that's got a serious vulnerability and they're concerned about the community as a whole, and it doesn't happen very often, but I've seen the core team take that plugin and push out the fix and auto patch everybody's sites. So they did that with the file manager vulnerability. That was a couple of years ago, and they pushed out a fix because it was being actively exploited and they were concerned, and it had a large install base. So they watch these things like a hawk. The WordPress core team, core security team, really does watch all of these things and really advocates for users to ensure everyone stays safe.
Yeah, very good. Here's a good question. Kevin in Arizona asks, does WordPress prevent the use of passwords from the rocku.txt file by default?
Does WordPress by default do that? No, WordPress is not going to prevent you from making mistakes, but it encourages you to have very long passwords. Like when you go and change your password in WordPress, it encourages you to make good decisions, but it's not going to stop you from making bad decisions. It's kind of the nature of open source, that you can do whatever you want with your site. But we're going to do what we can, WordPress as a whole, to encourage you to make good decisions. And that's one of the things I love about iTheme Security, is that it's really walking you through all of the good decisions that you can make in order to close doors or to close gaps or to get educated about security. Because the biggest security vulnerability in your site or in your client site is going to be the people. So education and giving people the right tools is really the greatest defense.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Here's a question. And by the way, Kevin, just as a follow-up, I would imagine that rockU.txt file, all of those things are probably in the Have I Been Pwned database. And so if you turn on that, if you turn on the iThemes Security Pro feature about refused compromised password, it's going to deal with all of that.
Right. Yeah. The Have I Been Pwned database, and I can put that up real quick too. This is such a great resource that, well, if I could type, there it is, Have I Been Pwned? And it is a great database. Any of those password databases that would be available to any hackers are in this, guaranteed. They have, is that a billion, 11.7 billion pwned accounts in here. It's really fun to go put your email or your phone number in here and see how pwned you are.
Yeah.
And yeah, so all of these accounts are in there. RockU's definitely in there. There's probably a lot of other ones.
Right. Yep. So and the great thing about iThemes Security is when it scans the user and it sees that the username and password combination is present there and Have I Been Pwned, then it will actually refuse that password. You can't use that to log in, and that happens automatically. It's fantastic. Let's see. Here's a great question from Tanya. Tanya said, I've heard that when the view details option disappears from a free plugin description on the plugin page, it needs to be yanked because it's been kicked out of WordPress. Is this true?
If the view details, it's been, what you'll get on, I'm trying to think of one that has been, there'll be a notice and it's on the repo that you can't download it anymore, and it's not available for download, and it won't tell you exactly why. It won't tell you if they violated terms. It won't tell you, but it'll still be listed. It'll still exist because there's people who are, they download it into their website and that code base is there. And if they want to click on, learn more or anything in their plugin dashboard, that will open up, the little modal that goes to the repo or that pulls in that repo page. And so there's still information there, but it's not available for download.
Yeah.
I think Adminer was one of them.
Yeah, and I don't believe that the view details option disappears, but right, there is a notice up there that says this plugin has been removed or something along those lines.
Yeah, so that's on the Adminer was one. This was a great little resource that allowed you to basically sort of do PHP My Admin within the WP admin dashboard, but this has been closed and no longer available for download, so you can't download it. There is information on the advanced view, but I think, so you can't even download old versions of it. So I think there was a security concern with this quite a few years ago.
Yeah, for sure. All right. That's going to bring us an end today, Kathy. This has been great. A lot of great questions from the folks in the audience and a great presentation from you. Any final thoughts as we're wrapping up?
No final thoughts other than, WordPress is getting more and more secure. The more security researchers that are looking at these things, the more secure it becomes. We don't have that in the Wix and Squarespace space. So it's really great to be in the open source world where we have security researchers. So, befriend your local hackers. They're here to help you.
Great way to end things. I have just dropped a few more links back in the chat room. If you missed those earlier, you can download today's slides. There's also the link to the live transcript if you'd like to save anything out of there. And finally, there is the replay link. We'll have that this video replay up in about an hour from now at the link that I've dropped in the chat room. Well, thanks once again, Kathy. It's been great. We also want to remind you of the 35% off deal for iThemes Security Pro plans through Friday, April the 8th. Use the code SiteScan to get 35% off of any of the plans for iThemes Security. Well, I appreciate everybody for being with us today. Hopefully you've learned a few things about hacking. I've certainly seen some things that I hadn't seen before. It's been a lot of fun. My name is Nathan Ingram from everybody here at iThemes. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you back here next time on iThemes Training, where we go further together.